happy to be here today with you all, and thank you to CICASA for inviting me to be here. So I'm going to be presenting this webinar on weaving it all together, collaboration, community, and science in the prevention of sexual assault. So as Greta said, I'm the Director of Prevention Education with the Blue Bench, and really excited to be here today to share about our prevention efforts and talk a little bit about what we know works and some challenges that we all face in prevention efforts. And in case you're not familiar with the Blue Bench, a quick overview. Our mission is to eliminate sexual assault and diminish the impact it has on individuals, their loved ones, and our community through comprehensive issue advocacy, prevention, and care. So some of our services include immediate response, so 24-hour sexual assault hotline for people of all gender identities 13 years old and up, hospital response 24 hours a day, as well as case managers to help navigate referrals and different kinds of logistics that may come up for survivors. Therapy for clients who are 13 and over in terms of individual therapy as well as groups. And then we also have workshops for people who may be supporting a loved one who's been sexually assaulted, and a safety and empowerment skills workshop for female identified people 13 and over. So today we're going to be talking mostly about our prevention department. So I'm going to go over our approach to prevention, tell you a little bit about the different programs that the Blue Bench uses in our communities, some of the challenges that we face in getting prevention programming implemented, and then talk about some of the strategies for addressing those challenges, and going over a little bit about what we know works in sexual violence prevention, so looking at some of the research behind our challenges and strategies for addressing those based on research. And then building program structure, so really looking at how do we address a lot of the challenges through things that are going to make us sustainable and scalable over time for prevention and education. And then looking at the importance of measurable outcomes and how we can use those to continue making our programs more sustainable. So a little bit about our prevention approach at the Blue Bench is that we are a community-based approach. So quote here from the CDC, sexual violence can be prevented with data-driven collaborative action. So that's something that we very much believe in, and we have a pathway to prevention, which means that we have programming that's impacting people across the lifespan and empowering people to have a role in prevention education. We operate from an anti-oppression framework, so we really believe that in order to address the problem of sexual violence in our culture and society, we all have to collectively work together to address all forms of oppression. So a little bit about our programs. We have programs that are developmentally appropriate. They're rooted in scientifically supported approaches to prevention, which means that they're recommended by the National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey, as well as the Center for Disease Control. Evidence and promising practice-based. And we also have approved curriculum by Denver Public Schools Community Partnership Program. And we're also in complete alignment with concepts that are outlined in the Colorado Department of Education academic standards. And we really focus on making our curriculum easy to use for teachers or other staff members at organizations who may be stretched for time by offering facilitators who have lots of training as prevention specialists, so over 50 hours of training per staff, so that the staff at those organizations don't need to be responsible for also being an expert on the topic. So a little bit about our programs, and I'm not going to go into a lot of depth about all of these, but I will talk a little bit about a couple I want to highlight. So we work in high school and college age groups with a program called Bringing in the Bystander, Establishing a Community of Responsibility, and are just launching our use of I Empathize Youth Empowerment Program, which is designed for prevention of teen exploitation. We also work in middle schools and junior highs with our Let's Talk About It program, Sexual Assault Prevention for Youth. And then we also have programming for parents, educators, and other youth serving adults called Keeping Kids Safe and Keeping Youth Safe. And then we also work with incarcerated individuals at the women's prison here in Denver. And that program is called A Part of the Solution, Sexual Violence Prevention Workshop. And then in all communities, we are going to be launching a program called Safe Bars, and that's also bystander-based intervention training for staff in alcohol-serving establishments. And then we also have a program called Knowledge is Power, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a couple minutes, and safety and empowerment skills for women or female-identified participants 13 and up. So I wanted to spend just a couple of moments to talk about why we use bringing in the bystander and a lot of bystander-based models for prevention programming. So current prevention theory, as many of you all may already know, really calls for a pro-social bystander approach, and that's been shown to be effective in linking attitudinal change with behavior change. And so in this particular program, the researchers were able to show that participants had a reduction in rape myth acceptance, in their bystander efficacy, so feeling like they're able to intervene as pro-social bystanders, and directly connected attitudinal change to bystander behavior. And the participants were found also to have significant change over a longer term in terms of sexual assault knowledge, rape myth acceptance, again, bystander efficacy, and then actual use of those intervention techniques. So really important about both the attitude and knowledge change, but connecting that directly to behavior change in terms of a social norms-based model of a community-based approach to prevention. It's one of the reasons that we really like this program. In terms of how it works, traditionally a lot of prevention programming has addressed the participants as either a potential victim or a potential perpetrator. And this program actually looks at all participants as neither, but as a person who is in a position to help and would want to support survivors, so building empathy for survivors also as a motivator for a reason to intervene, educating people about sexual violence and developing an understanding of our role as people who can be active bystanders to help in different kinds of situations. And then facilitating the development and practice using those bystander intervention skills. So it's a really kind of tool-based approach where the participants feel like they've actually practiced using the skills that they've been developing over the course of the curriculum so that they feel confident they could use those in their real daily lives. And so this model really is consistent with the call for socio-ecological approaches for prevention, and that's really focused on looking at that community-based approach. So the ways in which we as peers and as a community can change the norms that contribute to sexual violence in our culture. And I just wanted to share this quote because I think it demonstrates that connection between the attitude and knowledge change with actual behavior change. So this participant said, "I love the Blue Bench training. It was very valuable and very encouraging to want to be a pro-social bystander and keep an eye out for others. The conversations actually helped me to be a positive bystander last night right outside my house, helping a girl who was being followed and bullied by an older girl. The knowledge I gained has helped me to be more confident when it comes to assaults." So another bystander-based program that we use at the Blue Bench, and we're just launching this program, is called Safe Bars. And this was originally developed through a partnership of the Collective Action for Safe Space and Defend Yourself in Washington, D.C. And we are trained by that organization to use the curriculum and launching it in partnership with the Denver Police Department. And really that's about bringing those skills around bystander intervention to people who are working in alcohol-serving establishments who may be in a position to detect where alcohol is being used as a tool to facilitate sexual assault or target people that perpetrators perceive to be vulnerable. And the program structure is really designed to incentivize bars to be certified each year to use it, and that's going to be part of our Partners in Prevention program, which I will talk about in just a couple of moments. Additionally, we have our Let's Talk About It, which is rooted in the promising practices for younger audiences, and that's really looking at the fact that we need to be intervening much younger than college and offering prevention education programming at that age level, and ideally with co-facilitator teams that are both male and female, and really looking at ways that we can show allies in the effort to prevent sexual violence, and focusing on healthy relationships and using multiple sessions that are shorter than 60 minutes in duration rather than one really long session. And so this program is 4.5 hours. It's interactive and it's multi-session for middle school and junior high students, and also addresses really the underlying causes of sexual violence and helping people to identify healthy relationships and boundaries and how to be an ally or a pro-social bystander. And because we do work from a community-based approach, we look a lot at how do we also make sure that we're reaching all the community members who may interact with a lot of the young people that we are doing prevention education with. And so it's really important that we also offer programming for adults who may be in a position to identify behaviors and respond in proactive ways that help to protect young people. And so we do offer the Keeping Kids Safe and Keeping Youth Safe for that reason, and that's focused on identifying red flag behaviors and taking proactive steps to prevent sexual abuse, and also how to respond to disclosures to make sure that young people are getting the help that they need. And our Knowledge is Power program is really about introducing people to the topic of sexual violence and addressing a lot of the misconceptions that are out there. And it's really a great opportunity to introduce the issue and then expand to some of our scientifically supported programs, as we're also increasing awareness about the Blue Bench as a resource for survivors and their loved ones. So taking a couple minutes to look at some of the challenges and the strategies that we can use to address those challenges, we know that there are really valid and real limitations or barriers that a lot of organizations face. A lot of organizations that have the participant base that we're hoping to reach have realities about, if it's in a school, just class time limitations and all the different demands that are on the administration and the faculty can be really difficult to then fit in additional programming. And maybe having staff availability in order to coordinate having programming or the oversight can be a challenge if there's understaffing issues. And of course there's always going to be turnover in organizations, but that can be really difficult for continuity in terms of one person maybe being the contact person who was really invested in prevention, and then when that person leaves and somebody else comes in and isn't really aware of what they were doing, that can be really difficult to keep that programming sustained over time. And of course, budget issues. We are a no-cost barrier program. So we're by donation, and we work individually with each organization around what they can contribute for sustainable programming. But we know that sometimes it's difficult when there are financial limitations to be able to offer programming in general. And then resistance to talking about sexual assault. We know it can be a tough topic, and certainly there are ways that we can address that challenge. But one of the realities is there may be some fear or resistance to offering sexual violence programming in different kinds of organizations. So some of the things that we can do to address these challenges are working with the schedule and structure of the organization that we'd like to partner or collaborate with. So being flexible, but also recognizing that flexibility is within limitations for program fidelity. So we know that you can't just completely change a program and expect it to be as effective as it would be if you were in keeping with the structure and the content of the program. So we have to be mindful of that, and it can be a barrier, but we also can find lots of creative ways to work with organizations to have it work with their structure. So maybe offering sessions at times and in different formats that work well for their participants, and also providing well-trained staff to alleviate the workload barriers for faculty and staff. It's one of those things where you may want to have prevention programming, but if you feel like your staff then have to learn a whole lot about that issue and learn a curriculum and then plan to facilitate it, then maybe that's not going to happen. So at the Blue Bench, one of the things we do is offer really well-trained staff so that people can just say, yes, I'd like you to come and do this, and they don't then need to worry about all the work that goes into preparing to facilitate that workshop. And building relationships is a really big part of addressing a lot of these challenges. So that can be with specific on-site contacts. So somebody maybe at the organization who thinks it's a really important topic might be the person who can get it rolling as something that the organization is providing to their participants or their students or constituents. But that person, as we talked about in the challenges, might also leave at some point. And if other staff aren't aware of what's happening, it can be a challenge. So it's important to also build relationships with the organization. And at the Blue Bench, we are currently launching a Partners in Prevention program to address that challenge, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. So one of the things that we can also proactively do in addressing some of these challenges is really to use a positive framing. So clearly articulating how your program helps to solve the problems that that particular organization might face can be really helpful. So maybe reducing violence and trauma that people experience in the school system can help to support academic success. You know, we know that that's something that can be backed up with research around impacts of, you know, experiencing PTSD and trying to do well in school. So finding ways to clearly show how prevention programming will aid in the things that is important to that particular organization can be great. Also looking at the current strengths of organizations that you're going to be working with. So if you know that they're working from a leadership kind of development model, some of their programming is focused on that, it might be helpful to highlight the fact that a bystander intervention training will help to build leadership skills for people who are already participating in leadership types of programs. And then also looking at the time issue, we know that that can be a huge barrier, particularly in the school system. And so being able to show that the time that they're dedicating to prevention programming is also helping them meet evidence outcomes for the Colorado Department of Education academic standards. That might be really useful for somebody who's trying to decide if this is something they can commit to be able to say, okay, well, this is helping me meet a lot of the requirements that we need to be showing we're meeting anyway. And then really looking at how your program is aligning with the goals and requirements of that organization. So it might be that, you know, they absolutely need to be utilizing evidence and promising practice-based programs. So being able to demonstrate that that's something your program offers can be a really strong way to advocate for using it in that particular environment. And then really showing how you help the organization meet their needs and requirements. So there's lots of different types of requirements, and that's an important part of what we can offer in prevention programming, is to help strengthen what other organizations are already doing. So the Blue Bench Partners in Prevention program is currently something that we are launching, and that's really to look at that challenge of how do you establish better relationships with organizations. So rather than it being dependent on 2 specific contact people at each organization in order to keep the prevention programming going, this would instead allow for more of a organizational relationship. So it's a non-binding, non-financial agreement in which we agree to help out organizations who are going to be doing prevention programming by really highlighting their commitment and their good work in our community, while also offering some benefits in terms of being featured on the website, in our social media, you know, and to support their work in our community, while also they would be willing to talk about the fact that they are committed to prevention education and are dedicated to being part of the solution, to show that we are collaborating in a larger community-based effort around prevention. So it supports a multi-pronged approach. So this agreement would allow for organizations who want to have the full-length multi-session curriculum, which is what we know is going to be most effective, that we can also help those efforts by supporting them with campaign materials that help to reinforce learning outcomes, particularly around Sexual Assault Awareness Month, that we can help them with more campaign materials than they might otherwise be able to develop themselves. And then encouraging booster sessions for skill building. We know that that's one of the recommendations for effective programming. And so by virtue of people agreeing to offer the full length of a curriculum, then we're happy to also come back and offer additional skill building sessions with their students or constituents. And then recognizing efforts of an organization to be part of the solution. So really trying to create a larger cultural conversation about all the different stakeholders that care about this issue and are doing something proactively to address it is really important. And it also fosters cultural responsiveness. So by virtue of having some collaborative partnership, we're having ongoing discussions about the different needs in the community that we're working in. And that way we're able to really hear what are the concerns that we need to be addressing and what kind of maybe language do participants use that would be most familiar to them, that we can be sure to tailor our curriculum or come up with scenarios for skill building practice that feel relevant, that are things they would actually encounter in their daily lives. And it really shows a positive and proactive approach to dealing with sexual violence rather than framing it more as reactivity to a potential incident. So it allows those organizations to showcase that they are doing something that's in the best interest of their constituents and community in a way that's really positive. And then really looking at the continuity. We know that there may be people who are really excited about prevention programming, and then when they leave, other people may not know as much about it. And so it allows for an ongoing organizational conversation about the fact that we've had this partnership in the past and what that's looked like and what some of the impacts of it that's been positive have been, so that we can continue talking about future programming at that organization. And just as a quick example, I think everyone's probably familiar with all the attention for Title IX, which really has been driven by so many young activists. But one thing it's done is highlight the need for more prevention and calls for collaboration with local rape crisis centers. So that's one place where we're seeing in this larger cultural context a lot of attention to how important it is that organizations working towards the same goals are also collaborating to increase the resources available to people who need them. So looking at what works, talked a little bit about the programs we use, and this is really just an overview of some of the things that inform how we understand scientifically supported approaches to prevention. So in an evaluation of 30 years of research, there were 140 studies included. The researchers found that overall there are some best practices that have been identified, and there also needs to be a lot more research on these topics in order to know, in terms of long-term change, what interventions work best and in what communities that will contribute to attitudinal knowledge and behavioral change. So one of the things that the National Intimate Partner in Sexual Violence Survey had outlined were some scientifically credible approaches. And our curricula are in alignment with these recommendations. So those are including promotion of healthy and respectful relationships among youth, and addressing the beliefs, attitudes, and messages that condone, encourage, and facilitate sexual violence, stalking, and intimate partner violence. So that goes back to the focus on looking at a community-based model around social norms change and bystander intervention as a way that we can change social norms before violence occurs, and to support people after violence occurs to ensure that survivors have access to resources. There are a couple other things that these recommendations came out with which are beyond the classroom, and they're important from that community-based model. So ensuring appropriate response in terms of secondary and tertiary prevention and providing care for survivors in terms of access to healing, so whether that be therapy or group therapy, and some of the other resources that help a person to heal in their experience, is part of our prevention work, because we know that when we're out talking to people in a community setting, that there are going to be people who are either survivors or know a survivor and then share that information. So that's part of connecting people from the primary prevention to secondary and tertiary. So in addition to ensuring access to resources, holding perpetrators accountable is important, and the Blue Bench works very collaboratively with law enforcement as well as community organizations that are offering the prevention programming. So really taking a wider community-based lens is critical. And then the last of the prevention recommendations include looking at data. So supporting efforts that already have a strong research foundation and implementing strong data systems for monitoring and evaluation. And we're going to talk more about that in just a minute. And really looking at prevention of first-time perpetrators of sexual violence, stalking, and intimate partner violence. We go back to that community-based model, looking for how do we impact behavior change as well as attitude and knowledge. So given all of those recommendations in terms of what is scientifically credible in prevention, it's important to also know what kinds of strategies are effective in implementing those. So the research that's looking at effective strategies shows that we really need programs that are comprehensive, that are utilizing varied teaching methods, and that have well-trained staff to implement them, that they're theory-driven and culturally relevant, that they're appropriately timed and foster positive relationships, and multi-session or what's considered sufficient dose in order to be effective. So one of the things that is really important is that well-trained facilitators combined with the effective curriculum, because we know if you have an effective curriculum, which might mean that you have something that is rooted in the science around what works in sexual violence prevention, and the effective strategies are in place for what we know works in terms of that curriculum being implemented well. If the facilitators of that curriculum are not well trained and they're not skilled facilitators, then it can undermine the effectiveness of the curriculum itself. And vice versa, if you have excellent well-trained facilitators, but the program they're using really isn't effective in its strategies or its approach to prevention, then those well-trained facilitators can only be so effective. So it's really critical that we have both of those things combined. So facilitators who have training in facilitation skills as well as the content of that curriculum. And then without ongoing evaluation, we really don't know what's working well or where we have opportunities to strengthen the programs or the training for the facilitators. So the ongoing evaluation allows us to see, are we impacting our desired outcomes? And one of the things that's really critical in looking at, are we being effective in our work is starting from a solid foundation. So here we have a model that in the bottom section there you see foundation, where we're looking at logic models. So are we clear about the goals of our program, what outcomes we're looking at, and how we're going to get there? Does the staff have really solid training to be implementing the programs that are shown to be effective? And then making sure that there are processes in place for the program so that it can run smoothly, and structure that's responsive to community needs. So for example, we at the Blue Bench find that we work with so many different organizations that maybe need during the school day, some need after school hours, some want weekend hours. Really is so varied that it's important structure of staffing is responsive to that so that we can do as much prevention programming as possible. And then strengths-based management, so really ensuring that the staff are supported, have ongoing training and supervision, and are supported to continue in their professional development, which ultimately strengthens the programs to be sustainable over time. And so starting from that foundation, we can expand out to offering well-trained staff facilitating effective programs that have been selected based on what we know is scientifically credible. And using that to then start collecting some data that can show impact. And the ability to show impact can be leveraged then for more funding, to do more useful marketing, and really to communicate the positive impact that the organization's having in prevention and education. So that data collection and evaluation is something that has to be ongoing and not just a one-time thing. And then using all of that, using strong programs with well-trained staff, with data to show impact, and using it to continue making improvements, allows for that continued growth, which supports, hopefully, with the effective use of marketing, a growing demand in the community for prevention programming. And that allows for us to ultimately reach more people with effective prevention on a community-based level. So taking a second just to look at that ongoing evaluation, as I said before, it's a process, it's not a one-time action. So we know that it's really critical that in evaluation there may be things that indicate that it's actually the content or structure of the program that's not working well. Maybe it's generally, but maybe it's in particular communities that that's not quite the right fit. And so it's really critical that we can identify those things and then be responsive to that input to strengthen the programs. And we also talked about the staff training piece. The evaluation might be important for identifying where there's opportunities to give staff additional training that would strengthen the implementation of an effective program. So really using that to affirm what facilitators are doing well and build on that and add components of professional development for them to become more effective. It's really important that as we're getting feedback in our evaluation processes that we're affirming that partners are experts in their own communities and can give us really valuable insight into ways that we can be better prevention specialists. And so really demonstrating that we can be responsive to that kind of input and evolve in our programming with fidelity to the curriculum, which is always a challenge, but an important component that we can always strive to do better with. And that allows us to be more attentive to cultural responsiveness, so tailoring the curriculum. As I mentioned earlier, by virtue of having the structure in place that allows for a lot of partnership and collaboration, we're able to better identify places that we can tailor our curriculum, whether it be addressing issues that the community feels are important, or language or dynamics that are happening within that particular community, and making sure that the participants are able to make it relevant to their own lives, because that's an important part of the learning process. And then the ongoing improvements to program content, structure, and implementation based on that feedback and data. So hopefully, all of that is going to be contributing to measurable goals and outcomes. And so we're talking a little bit about sustainability and scalability today. And outcomes are really critical for that because it really has the ability to demonstrate that the program is successful in impacting the overall goals. And the new organizations who are considering bringing in prevention programming, whether they want to dedicate their time and resources to it, they would want to know that it's going to have a positive impact. And organizations that you're perhaps already partnering with or that we have as part of our Partners in Prevention program, they want to also know that the programming that they're continuing to provide is having a positive impact. So demonstrating that can be leveraged later for additional funding, and it can also help to strengthen relationships with partners. So being able to say, hey, our partnership is allowing youth in our community to have a better understanding of healthy relationships and feel more confident in being able to be an active bystander in their peer group. That's a really important thing that can help to strengthen that relationship going forward. And then more funding and resources, that's what allows for the scalability. So, we have short-term goals from starting at that foundation that we saw on the other slide to moving out to offering the programming with the intention that we'll be able to scale it up to reach more and more people. And so using that, those outcomes can be a really critical part of that being successful. And communications to constituents and funders is also important. So demonstrating that the resources or maybe the donations that are coming from people or other organizations are being used in a way that is directly contributing to the organization's mission. So, it's really important that we're able to look at, what is the mission of the Blue Bench, and is our prevention education programming contributing to that? And so you can use your outcomes to support the need for more funding and the impact that more funding would provide. And also just thinking about relationships with your constituents, whether they be a donor or not, that it really helps to make a strong case for being invested in the organization when you can show that you're really using resources well and having a positive impact. So that might be things like, generating interest in attendance to events, or people who might volunteer their time because they feel the organization is worthy of their time. And perhaps it's donations. It also could be participation in programs and showing that you have a really strong commitment to effective programming. And so I'm sure many of you, this is very familiar, but logic models can be really helpful in thinking about how we structure prevention education programming. So clarifying program goals and then using that to identify the desired outcomes. So outcomes being things that are change statements or targets or perhaps benchmarks that you're going to reach through the program. And they should be realistic, attainable, and appropriate for the scope of the program and be related to the core purpose. It then helps to say, so here are the outcomes that we want to see. What kind of indicators do we need in order to know that we have those outcomes? And then using that information to identify what data needs to be collected and what are the appropriate tools for getting that data. So it might be surveys, maybe pre and post testing or interviews. It could be program statistics. There are lots of different kinds of data that contribute to the outcome indicators. And then creating a realistic outline in terms of what activities are going to be required to get there. And that's really important because certainly goals can be lofty, and we also all have realities of our resource limitations. And so it's really useful in thinking about, what materials do we need, what funding do we need, what other resources have to be in place, a setting or a location in order to host it, staff, collaborations, all of those things that require resources allows for you to look at realistically what can you do in terms of short and long-term planning. So that might be resource allocation to meet goals or looking at the funding needed to meet those resource goals. So this is just a quick example to give you a sense of in a sexual violence prevention program, you might use pre and post testing to assess some desired outcomes. So that could be scales that are giving you information about changes in participant buy-in to rape myth acceptance, in terms of whether they have reductions in victim-blaming beliefs and attitudes, if participants are increasing their understanding of rape culture, of sexual assault and harassment and violence, healthy relationship skills, understanding boundaries. We might be able to tell if there's participants having increases in knowledge about how to support a survivor or the available resources in the community, since we know that more awareness of the resources will help people connect to them. We can learn about whether people increase their understanding of pro-social bystanders in the context of sexual violence and their role in that, as well as understanding the decision-making process and having self-efficacy for being a bystander. And then we might be able to assess changes in increases in commitment to engage in pro-social bystander behaviors or actual pro-social bystander behaviors that people are demonstrating as a result of going through the program. So obviously this is not an exhaustive list, but I just wanted to give you a sense of some of the things that we can use those measurement tools in order to look at some of the outcomes that indicate that we are reaching our intended goals. And I just wanted to share a little bit about at the Blue Bench, you know, one of the things that we've been specifically working towards is seeing an increase in prevention programming in our communities that is scientifically supported, and to increase our reach in prevention programming overall. And so this is a really helpful way for us to look at, are we able to do that? And from 2014 to 2015, by really working towards collaborative models that also help us to collect data and are responsive to feedback, which has helped us to continue strengthening relationships, to increase all the organizations that are interested in prevention programming, we have been able to show that we've increased our scientifically supported programs by 205%, and we also saw an overall 62% increase in our prevention and education programs. And so that's a great result for us when looking at some of our goals and going back to that foundation of creating the structure, processes, and kind of quality control around both the curriculum that we're using and the staff training to deliver those in order to create more scalable and sustainable programming. So I wanted to leave a few minutes at the end here for questions, and I'm going to go ahead and open that up, and I just want to thank everybody for taking the time to be here today and to learn about prevention programming, and I'm really interested as well to learn from you all if you're using different kinds of prevention programming or strategies in ways that you have found that to be successful in your communities. So I will open that up to any questions. I'm not sure how to tell if there's questions, but not sure if you do the hand raising.
We just actually, if you want to type your question, you can type it into the questions/chat box, and then Susie can definitely read your question out loud to the group and hopefully give you a great answer.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, let's see. I see a question here. Oh, I think it's somebody introducing themselves, but I don't see a question in there. Okay, great. So we'll give you all a chance to type anything in if you have questions. And in the meantime, I think I'll just mention that one of the things that we look at from a community-based approach is finding lots of opportunities to create a multi-pronged strategy around prevention education, so reinforcing a lot of the messages that we're delivering in our prevention programming to be reflected in our broader culture. And so we certainly are connecting our social media and the messages that we're consistently reinforcing online to all of our prevention education programming. And we also are doing work with community collaboration, for example, the Start by Believing campaign in the Denver area, in order to, again, reinforcing a lot of what we talk about in prevention education is how to support a survivor, the importance of believing people. And so all the different capacities that the Blue Bench is working in a community, a lot of communities that are invested in our efforts are strengthening the work that we're doing in the classroom as well. Let's see, I think I've got a question here. Okay, it says not a question but rather a comment. Thank you for the great information. I'm a SART coordinator and work closely with our junior college in prevention. I go out to colleges 2 to 3 times a year with presentations, and I will surely utilize some of this information provided. Well, thank you so much. I'm glad that it's really helpful to you. And I think I included on one of the slides at the bottom of the logic model slide that a lot of the tools that I've utilized in the past come from the Urban Institute. So if you're going to be using some of this information, I'd highly recommend checking that out, since they have some templates that you can just go ahead and start plugging into. Let's see, another question. Yes, so do you have any resources or programs about rape culture? Also, any information about the association of drugs and alcohol? Yes, absolutely. I didn't go into too much depth about the bringing in the bystander curriculum, but that specifically is addressing rape culture. So it's really looking at the continuum of sexual violence and helping participants to understand how a lot of the things that are happening frequently but are not very highly recognized in our culture as sexually violent, or creating a culture in which sexual violence can happen. It's helping them to identify those things and their role in intervening in those risky situations, and connecting that to the ways in which perpetrator behavior can be camouflaged when people aren't speaking up or calling attention to problematic behavior that may ultimately lead to a sexual assault. So we talk a lot about rape culture in that program, and I'm happy to talk with anyone offline or in more depth. That program also is addressing drugs and alcohol in the consent section. So we talk a lot about perpetrator behavior and the role that alcohol plays both in that and in the Safe Bars program. And I see a comment saying, can you speak further to the Safe Bars program? So I'll tie that in here. The Safe Bars program is really about not focusing on, oh, well, how much did such and such a person drink, which is so victim blaming, but rather than that we're focusing on what are perpetrators doing in terms of use of alcohol as a tool to incapacitate somebody or to identify someone that they perceive to be a vulnerable target. And how do we use bystander intervention skills to identify those behaviors early and to intervene in ways that make sure that people who are the aggressor know they're being identified, that people are noticing, and that steps are being taken in order to get somebody out of that situation. So that program is, again, it's a skill-based curriculum. It's about 2 hours, and it also talks about the spectrum or continuum of sexual violence and connects that to all the different ways that we can identify behaviors and use really creative strategies to intervene. And that was launched, well, it's currently being launched in partnership with DPD. And DPD has secondary employment officers who work in some bars. And those officers, while they wouldn't be the primary person to intervene, might be in a position to identify the behaviors happening in the environment and to work collaboratively with the staff to de-escalate those things and intervene before they may escalate into a sexual assault. So that program is really focused on understanding the dynamics of perpetrator behavior and giving people kind of real-world skills that they could go use on their next shift. And it also addresses things like, what kinds of policies or proactive steps can the environment, the bar, take in order to make sure that the people who are being targeted also know that they can go to staff and say, hey, I need help, or identify other people's behavior that would be effective then for the staff to intervene. So it's really creating a safer culture, but focusing on how much people are drinking as the cause of sexual assault. So we're really excited to be launching that, and if anyone knows bars interested, certainly you can contact me. Let's see, just checking for any other questions. Let's see. Says, bringing this topic to light to post-traditional students is sometimes difficult as they feel it is not their responsibility to help or they know all the information. You have given some great information and some introductions into other great trainings and skills. Thank you, Blue Bench staff. Oh, well, thank you very much. I'm glad it was so helpful. And absolutely, I hear you, it can be difficult with non-traditional audiences and trying to implement prevention programming. And I will say that we certainly have had success in building some relationships and getting prevention programming implemented. And it's also exciting when we start to see it being student-driven. So the student body feeling it's important and wanting that helps to create some buy-in across the organization. So having relationships both with the students and with faculty and administrative staff can be really important. So just something to think about as you're looking at strategies for addressing that barrier. So it's certainly something that comes up. All right, just checking for any other questions. Okay, I think that I've covered all of them. One of the questions was whether you'll receive this information after the workshop, and I know you're going to be getting a follow-up email, and so we'll be able to communicate afterwards in terms of any of the information that you'd like to receive. And I'm going to be available too to talk to people if there's anything that you'd like more information about, either in terms of the Blue Bench programs or any of the scientifically supported approaches or logic models, evaluation, any of the things I talked about. I'm happy to talk to people one-on-one as well. So I think with that, if there are no other questions, I don't see any others, so I can probably go ahead and wrap up for today. And thank you so much for taking the time to be here, and I look forward to connecting with you afterwards.
Well, thank you so much, Susie, for being here, and thank you so much to the Blue Bench as well for willing to participate and providing us this amazing information.
Absolutely.
Like Susie said, we will be sending a follow-up email. We have a couple steps to take before we send any kind of information out. Please, I would like to remind everybody, I'm sorry, I have a cold, so to remind everybody to fill out the survey at the end of the webinar, because that helps us to know what you would like to get, what kind of information you would like to have in the future, as well as I would like to invite all of you to participate on our next March webinar, which will be having Laura Zarate from our coalition from Texas, from Artesana, and we would love to invite all of you to participate. The webinar pretty much is a workshop giving us information about a program that they have, which is called Corazones Lastimados, Healing the Wounded Heart, and it's we are trying to it's an art project, and we're trying to set it up to all the different parts of Colorado and gather some art. They will show, and they will have the voice of many survivors or people that works in the field like all of us. So please participate. We would really love for all the corners of the states to participate and have art that shows your views and the way that I lost my thought of mine. So anyways, it's art. Please participate. We would love to have you. The webinar is March 8th at 1 o'clock, so please enroll, and we hope to see you soon. Thank you so much to all of you.